Hi, my friends. It's David Ault. And once again, thank you for joining me here on The Gathering. I've been noticing an enthusiasm that's been percolating inside of me all week as I was preparing to speak to you on part two on the subject of love. As I mentioned last week, we're going to take advantage, if you're watching in real time, the month of February and sort of reposition ourselves to be willing to examine something that is so indefinable, so large in scope, and to maybe move beyond our understandings with regards to love on the surface and to cultivate some deep roots and to talk about it in a way that perhaps we've never talked about it before. And that's exciting for me. I hope it's exciting for you, and maybe one of the reasons why you're back for part two. And the way that I felt urged to do that was to merge it with the medicine wheel, the Native American medicine wheel, to go back and to examine, well, what is that exactly? It's a method used by indigenous wisdom keepers and sages and utilizing the four cardinal directions, noting that each of these directions are indicative of passages within our lives. And as we approach the themes of these directions, they're given to us as a place to pause and to dive deeper with regards to excavating our own innate power and wisdom. I want to share that last piece once more so you can hear it again. Excavating, unveiling the power and the wisdom that, again, is not something that we're trying to obtain out there, but is already inherent within us. That is a key piece that I want you to really hold and sit with as we do these examinations together. So last week we started with the South, and we were saying that is an examination of how you and I are still clinging to events from the past. And today we're going to talk about the cardinal direction of West. And West is indicative of noticing all of the relationships that feel toxic and draining. And I am sure that this is not your first time at the rodeo with regards to this subject matter. I am sure that if you are listening to this, you've done invaluable work with regards to the way in which you interface in the history of your relationships. And so words such as toxic and draining, again, are not new to you. But I want to ask you if you would be willing to set those definitions aside for today. Again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to approach this with fresh ears and open heart, and to look at this huge, inexplicable word that we've used to describe love, which is really the all-encompassing energy of life. And so if we're giving pause to the way in which that energy, love, is thriving and potent and necessary with regards to relationships, then we're going to have to set some preconceived notions or beliefs aside in order to be on fresh territory. Are you willing to do that with me? All right. So again, love, now the cardinal direction of West, which is inviting us to re-examine relationships that we have defined as toxic and draining. So in order to do that, we kind of have to step into the maximum view, the macrocosm. And the macrocosm, and I'm going to give you some definitions to play around with. So the one that is applicable for this is the absolute and the relative, the macrocosm and the microcosm, the universal and the individual. What are those words? They're describing the non-dualistic nature of the all. When people went to Ramana Maharshi and they said, how do I heal, or how do I work with, or how do I manage all of the other people? And his answer was, there are no others. That was going from zero all the way to the zenith of understanding with regards to what we're talking about today. We have to be able to hold, or to be willing to grasp within our understanding, our consciousness, these two seeming polarities: macrocosm, microcosm, infinite, individualistic, absolute, relative. And in the holding of this, we have to begin to realize that the word opposite is going to throw you off, because they're not opposite, they're interwoven. And you can't have one without the other. So all week, my enthusiasm has taken me back to one of the seminal books that I studied in my theology degree, and the one that stayed with me the most. And it was by a man named Thomas Troward. And Thomas Troward was an influential writer in the 19th century, who was British born, but lived in India and served as a judge in the High Court. And it wasn't until after he retired and moved back to England that he began to write his thoughts on metaphysics, his thoughts on this relationship that we're speaking about, the absolute and the relative. And the way in which he wrote was quite sort of formal, Old English. In teaching it, I would say to students, he's going to start a sentence on page 3, and the period to that sentence might be on page 7. But what was beautiful about his writing was it was very linear. He was masterful in deductive reasoning, and he would introduce a concept, and then he would carry you through that concept, and you had to pay attention until the conclusion of that concept. And so I fell in love with his information, and I credit him, and other scholars and teachers and theologians credit him with being the first to put on paper, attempt to put on paper what we would call the creative process in the individual, which is the merging of the absolute to the relative, the subjective, the internal to the objective, the outer, and to do it in a way that you and I could perhaps understand this better, and to begin to sort of renovate our own interior world to harness this understanding. And I don't want you to get too caught into the weeds. Please stay with me. But here's one of the most beautiful things that he said that really meant a lot to me. He said, the error of the extreme idealist is endeavoring to realize the absolute without the relative. And the error of the extreme materialist is endeavoring to realize the relative without the absolute. I love that. He was saying that on the one side, the mistake is in trying to realize an inside without an outside, and on the other, in trying to realize an outside without an inside. Both are necessary to the formation of a substantial understanding, a substantial entity of awareness within our consciousness. What does that have to do with the direction of the West and toxic relationships? Well, it's in understanding that people, this thing that we're labeling us. Remember, Ramana Maharshi said there is no us. There's only one. Then what we're looking at and what we're really examining, if you're willing to go beyond, is a part of ourselves. That all toxic relationships are mirrors of an internal toxicity, not as a punitive finger-pointing condemnation, but in a way to understand the conditioning of the relative that we can't escape from. And that means then that anybody who has been toxic or draining is, in the absolute, a teacher, an informant, an invitation, if you will, to go into that renovation that we're doing, and to not do it in a sort of halfway, but to go full blown with regards to an understanding and an appreciation that then all interfacing with this thing that we call humanity is a skillful, meticulous design, that there has never been and never will be any accidents with regards to all of the history of the relationships that we have. Other people have described it as soul pods, that everyone that you're meeting, whether what we determine to be the past, present, or future, they're all a part of a soul pod, and we're all working together in order to push us into a particular kind of growth. And then no wonder I've always loved this one line from Neil Donald Walsh in the first book. I believe it was the first book of his Conversations with God. And it was kind of just a throwaway line where he said, "Remember, I have sent you nothing but angels." So look at all of the things that I've just listed. You can't have the absolute without the relative with regards to the deepest of understanding. And do you want to have the deepest of understanding? You get to consider that there is no us and them, there's only one. You get to consider that everything is connected in some divine way, even though it smarts, even though it hurts, even though it might be the central focus of our greatest wounding. No matter how dramatic, no matter how impactful it is. And so this is a huge leap for a lot of people to think that we've never been sent anything but angels. And I will tell you that there will be scores of us who will not be able to grasp or be willing to grasp that in this incarnation. And that's okay. That's okay. True confession, I am only now, as I'm well into my seventh decade of being willing to see it and to understand it in a way that has brought me great peace. I would say that in decades prior, I understood these intellectual concepts because I was very attracted to spirituality, but I didn't know it. I didn't feel it. I couldn't accept it because there was still a great harboring of pain and judgment around my narrative, around my upbringing, around family, around those situations that had caused great harm. And it took a lot, full admission, it took a lot for me to get to where I am today. But that's where I have to teach from now. I have to extend a lifeline to you to say, if you really want to understand the greater impact of love, then I want to invite you on a journey to go into the beyond, to go into what Ramana Maharshi said, there is no us. There is no them. There's only one. That's why non-dualism now is so feverishly enticing to me, because how far can I go? How far can I go? So again, what Thomas Trord was saying is, on the one side, the mistake is trying to realize an inside without an outside. If I do all of the things about how to protect myself from toxic people, if I do all of the things about how to restore and to save my energy from being drained, fine. That's all well and good. People are going to talk about and write books about energy vampires and all of these types of things. And that's necessary. It's necessary to read those things. It's necessary to consume all of that and to consider it, to practice the steps and the applications to get relief, to reclaim one's power, and all of those kinds of things. And I will tell you that that's not the finish line. There is no finish line. There's something even beyond all of that relative advice. And what lies beyond all of that relative advice is now an absolute playground, an absolute sandbox that says, okay, now I'm being asked to look at the story, the wounding, and to realize that all of that is absolutely real, but it's relatively real. And that in the world of the absolute, in the realm of the soul, in the macrocosm, each of these people have fulfilled a meticulous and necessary role in my growth. Now, does that mean that if they're still living and breathing on this planet, that I'm supposed to have them in my life? No, I'm not saying that. I remember Marianne Williamson years ago attempting to talk about these things. And she said, just because you become aware of and entertain a more non-dualistic understanding of relationships does not mean you have to have lunch with these people. But it's that as they come into your consciousness and as you think about them, you no longer ruminate or chew on the fact of the injustices that they have brought you, but rather you reflect upon them with a sort of inexplicable thanksgiving for all of the things that they have contributed to your growth. I know it's crazy. I know it's forgiveness on steroids. But I want you to hear that if you want to do love differently, if you want to step into the medicine wheel and you want to unveil and excavate anything that's harboring you from maximizing your reason for being here on this planet, this is it. This is it. The cardinal direction of the West is saying, okay, you're going to examine relationships that have felt toxic and draining. And in so doing, you have to go through all of the relative steps to that. But now, as you stand on the brink of understanding it from the concept of the absolute, what are you willing to do? What happens then if you say yes to this? Well, it means that you may have to stop telling the story. At least telling the story in the way that you've been telling it. It may mean that you have to kind of back off on the way in which you aggressively post and write and participate in this world of social media. It may mean that you actually have to pray, to put on your personal altar the pictures of those people who are activating this wounding, and are any of us not given a ripe amount of people to do that? We live in a world where a division seems more greater and more heightened than it ever has. The world of politics, the world of inequity, the world of injustices, all of the rhetoric is so heightened now that it's the perfect environment for those of you who want to swim deeper in the realm of the absolute with regards to love and your own history of people, of beings, of souls, and how you can quantum leap your own journey into expansion. This is it. And so because again, love Thomas Troward. He said, the universal, so what are the other words? The absolute, the macrocosm, can never be simply the individual or the relative. The absolute is never the relative. That would be a contradiction in terms. But because the universal personalness, the absolute personalness, the understanding of the macrocosm is the root of all individual personalities, then it finds its highest expression in response to those who realize its personal potential and nature within us. I know, again, Thomas Troward, a lot of old English, or a lot of, maybe it sounds like word salad to you, but let me tell you what he's saying. All of this, which is the infinite, cannot be defined as the finite. Of course it can't. But when that which is the finite, which is us, when that which is the relative, which is us right now, as we're having this identification as you and I'm David, when we accept that which, I'm pointing up, but it's everywhere. When we accept and become enthused by the fact that which is the limitlessness, the infinite, wants to play, wants to interface with us to the degree that we allow it, then that means that its nature represents and lives through us and expresses through us to the degree of that permission. Do you hear what I'm saying? That joy, the boundlessness of joy, the boundlessness of the isness of happiness, the boundlessness of fulfillment. There's no boundaries with fulfillment. There's no boundaries with peace. There's no boundaries with wholeness. And so in the absolute, all of those virtues of the absolute, to the degree that we say, okay, come on in. I want to be stripped clean of my retaliation, my vengeance, creating specialness around my wounding. I'm so willing to let all of that go. The toxic relationships, the story, no matter how juicy they are, I'm willing to let it all go and let the absolute come. I'm going to make space for it. I'm going to open up and allow it to come in as much as I'm willing to do. As much as I'm willing to allow is the degree in which it's going to now exemplify, manifest, show up, be tangible, the intangible to the tangible. But it's by my invitation. It's by your invitation. That's love. Love, indefinable. Love, macrocosm. To the degree that I allow love to come in and to cleanse my retaliation, my judgment, my grudges, my story, is the degree that I reap the harvest of that kind of allowing. So the big question, do you want that? And so you could sort of say there's a cost to that. And the cost is letting go of seeing people or concretizing people as toxic, as the perpetrator, and being willing to see them as a sort of gatekeeper or a master teacher that has brought me to this point in time to even allow me to consider this. I tell you, when you get into this level of consideration and play, oh, my friends, my God, it's only beginning. It's only beginning from here. Want to hear from you. Thank you once again. That's part 2. Parts 3 and 4 coming up with the other directions in the medicine wheel. You are so loved. That invitation is a universal invitation for all of us. It actually is our destiny. So why postpone? Why postpone joy? Why postpone that? Is the story that valuable? I love you. See you next time.